God is love, unconditional love. And God seeks to love you and your family, your neighborhood, and everyone around you. He seeks the whole world seeks to give unconditional love to the whole world. The thing is, can you receive it? So that's my talk this morning about unconditional love. You've heard of St. Augustine. He was a bishop in the 5th century AD, and he wrote a book about 1,500 years ago called The City of God. He finished that book in, actually it's 22 books, but he finished it in 426 AD. And the essence of these books, these 22 books, is he compares the city of earth to the city of God. What's the difference between the city of earth and the city of God? The difference is that the citizens of the city of earth practice conditional love. The citizens of the city of God practice unconditional love. Unconditional love, the definition of unconditional love is, I care how you feel. And that leads to heaven. Conditional love says, I like how you make me feel, and this leads to hell. So I want to talk about how to receive and give unconditional love. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. I remember when I first joined the unification movement, someone asked me, if you follow true parents, does that mean your physical parents are false? So I was a young member. Wow, that's some question. I had to think about that. And I said, well, no, my parents are good parents. They were there always for me. My father used to come to the baseball games and, hit that ball, Don. And we'd go to swim club in the summertime, especially at night, which is great, swimming, with the lights in the pool on, jumping in the water, my parents are always there for me. They're even there for when I started my big family. So I couldn't accept that. Are my parents false parents? But the question still stands. I would ask the question differently today, though. I would rephrase it, and I would say, did my parents teach me how to receive and give unconditional love? The answer is no. No, they didn't. And why didn't they? Because my father and mother they didn't receive unconditional love either. And neither did their parents before them, and so on. So you can't give what you don't have, right? So my parents are unable to teach me unconditional love, so I didn't know what it was either. So like all parents that live in the city of earth, they raised me the best I could, but without unconditional love. So I'd like to put up my first slide. First one is called the Wart King and the Wise Man. So if you could put that up. So you can read along, I'll just read it, okay? Once there was a rich and beautiful kingdom that stretched beyond the horizon in all directions. But the prince of that kingdom was very unhappy. He had warts all over his face. You know what a wart is? Anybody have warts? I'm getting a few yeses out there. A wart is a piece of hard skin that kind of just grows on your face. And anyway, this prince had warts all over his face. He had warts all over his face, and everywhere he went, people teased him and laughed at him. So he mostly stayed in his room, alone and miserable. Upon the death of his father, the prince became king and issued a decree that no one, on pain of death, would ever laugh at his warts again. But still he stayed in his room, ashamed and alone. On the rare occasions that he did go out, he put a cloth bag over his head, which covered his warts, but also made it difficult to see. Finally, after many years, the king heard about a wise man living on top of a nearby mountain. Hoping the wise man could help him, the king climbed the mountain and found the old man sitting under a tree. Taking the bag off his head, the king said, "I've come for your help." The wise man looked intently at the king for several long moments and finally said, "You have warts on your face." The king was enraged. That was not what he climbed all the way up to hear. "No, I don't," he screamed. Ashamed and angry, he put the bag back over his head. "Yes, you do," the wise man insisted gently. "I'll have you killed," shouted the king. "Then call your guards," the wise man said. "My guards aren't here," the king shrieked helplessly. "I climbed all the way up this mountain to ask you your help, and all you can say is that I have warts on my face? How cruel you are." Angry and frustrated, the king ran from the wise man, falling repeatedly because he couldn't see very well with a bag over his head. Finally, the king fell down a steep slope into a lake where he began to drown. The wise man jumped in, pulled the king to shore, and took the bag from his head so he could breathe. The king was horrified when he saw the wise man staring at him. "You're laughing at me," the king said. "Not at all," the wise man replied, smiling. With his eyes fixed on the ground, the king said, "The boys in the village laughed at me, and my father was ashamed of me." "I'm not one of the boys in the village," the wise man immediately responded, "and I am not your father. That must have been hard for you." "Yes, it was," the king admitted with tears in his eyes. "But as you can see, I'm not laughing at you, and I'm not ashamed of you," the wise man repeated. Somehow, being with the wise man did feel different to the king. He looked into the lake and saw his reflection. "I really do have a lot of warts, don't I?" "I know," the wise man agreed. "And you don't find them disgusting?" "No, and I don't find my own warts disgusting anymore either." The king noticed for the first time that the wise man also had warts. "Why do you not wear a bag over your head?" "I used to," the wise man replied. "But with the bag over my head, I couldn't see and I was lonely, so I took it off." "Didn't people laugh at you?" asked the king. "Oh, sure, some did. And I hated that, just as you do. But gradually I found a few people who didn't laugh, and that made me very happy." The king was thrilled. No one had ever looked at his warts without laughing at him, showing their disgust. "I think I won't wear the bag when you're around," the wise man smiled. "When you go home, you might leave the bag here. Will I find other people like you who won't think I'm disgusting?" The king wondered aloud. The wise man nodded. "Of course you will. And with the love of those people, you won't care when other people laugh." The king dropped the bag on the ground and went back to his kingdom, which was far more beautiful without the bag over his head. And he did find people who didn't mind his warts and all. For the first time in his life, he was very happy. So that story comes from this book. Anybody Real Love? Real Love. This is written by Dr. Bear, and he talks about unconditional love. So the next slide I want to talk about. This is how you receive unconditional love. The four-step process to receive unconditional love. First is truth, seen, accepted, and loved. In other words, the king had to tell his truth, recognize his truth, and he said that. He said, I really do have a lot of warts. When he's looking in the lake, and he goes, wow, look at all those warts. That's telling his truth. Now, before you can tell your truth, you need to have faith. In other words, the word faith, what does that word mean, faith? Faith is not a feeling. We're talking about feelings here. Love is a feeling, right? But when we talk about faith, we're talking about a choice. So before you can tell your truth, you have to have faith first. Faith means you're trusting that there'll be a good result by you telling your truth, in this case. And by telling your truth, your hope is that you'll receive unconditional love. So that's called faith. You've heard of the foundation of faith before. Why does Divine Principle use that word, foundation of faith? Well, foundation is like the foundation of a house. In order for a house to be strong and stay there, the foundation has to be unchanging. So that's why that word, foundation of faith. And where does faith come from, by the way? I don't want to get too theological, but faith comes from God. God gives you the faith so that you can have faith. So when you start believing that if I tell my truth about my warts, about my problems to a wise person, then I'll receive unconditional love. That's the faith part of this. So when you start telling your truth, so for example, I got involved with Real Love, and for 3 years we used to go to a Real Love meeting every Wednesday from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock in Hawaii. And basically we sat around in a circle and people would tell their truth. So after time, I never talked anymore. I just listened for a couple hours. In other words, people were there getting in the habit of telling their truth. So when you begin to tell your truth, what happens is you're not practicing conditional love anymore. That's the value of it. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So when you start telling your truth, you enable a wise person, in this case the wise man, to see you. So the wart king said, oh, I have a lot of warts, that's his truth. And I have faith that this wise man's not going to laugh at me anymore. And so he took the bag off of his head. So now he's seen. And then the wise man accepted what the king was. A king with warts all over his face. Big deal. So what? I have warts. And because of that, the king felt accepted for the first time in his life. And it says here, he became very happy. So, where does happiness come from? From being unconditionally loved. But you can't be unconditionally loved when somebody else is empty. You have to find a wise man who's already loved. A wise man is a person that already has unconditional love. He's already filled up. An expression in the Bible, my cup runneth over, it's talking about God's love. Unconditional love is in me, pouring out of me. So a wise man is already filled with unconditional love, and he's able to see the wise man for who he is because he has an experience in life. He's filled up with love. And the wise man is accepting of the ward king and therefore giving unconditional love to the ward king. Now, once you get in the habit of telling your truth to wise people, you just don't talk to anybody because they can't accept you for who you are. You have to find a wise man. So when you have faith and you believe that a wise man's going to appear to accept you for who you are, then that person will appear. It'll happen. And it happens. When you start telling your truth, other people who are telling their truth begin to Jeffrey's back. So, but we all live in the city of earth. We're not used to unconditional love. What we're used to is conditional love. Remember, conditional love is, I like the way you make me feel. So, because we live in the city of earth, to get love, we do things, we manipulate others. And to protect ourselves from losing the little bit of love we think we have, we manipulate others. And that's called getting and protecting behavior to keep conditional love coming your way. So the forms of conditional love are power, praise, pleasure, and safety. I didn't want to go into conditional love too much because it took me 3 years to go through this book, so I couldn't do it in 10 minutes. So I'm focusing on the unconditional love side. But you already know what conditional love is because all of you live in that world. You live in the city of earth. So to get conditional love for myself, I lie, I blame, I play the role of the victim, and I cling. And to protect people from taking love from me, I lie, I blame, I play the victim, and I run. So let me tell you what lying is. And we do it unconsciously. We don't realize we're lying. So lying is anytime we modify our behavior to get people to like us, that's lying. Just sit and watch the two people in a conversation and watch their facial expressions, watch how they talk to one another, their voices go up and down. You can tell right away they're lying. A wise person could go, oh, you're lying. So I used to go to this meeting, like I said before, and we didn't have any wise people in Hawaii, so we had to Skype people from Phoenix, Arizona, and there would be a wise person, on a little screen. Everybody's looking at the screen. One time I brought a member that was homeless. His blessing broke up. His name is Lee. Anyway, he came to Hawaii and he had no one. He'd walk around the streets. He joined the church a long time ago, but his blessing broke up and he couldn't get over it. So I invited him to Real Love. And right away he started talking about, because he's living on the street, he knows how to, live out there. Because to live out there, you're alone all the time. Nobody wants to be around you. So he starts talking to this wise person who's in Arizona. And he says, I'm just a poor homeless man. And she stopped him right away. She goes, no, you're not. You're a child of God. No, I'm just a poor homeless man. Nobody loves me. I'm out on the street. You're not a poor homeless man. You're a child. Do you hear me? So anyway, he didn't come back after that because there was too much. Someone who was really seeing. She challenged him right away. So, we manipulate others to do what we want, and that's called conditional love. The biggest one is the misuse of sex. You've heard that before, right? Sex goes along all four forms of imitation love: power, pleasure, praise, and safety. In other words, we use sex to get power, we use sex to get pleasure, we use sex to get praise, we use sex to get safety. And the reason people's marriages break up, two people fall in love, and a few years later they hate each other, they don't want to be near each other. 50% of marriages break up, even in movement, I think. But I'm not sure about that. So why do they break up? It's because marriage in the city of earth is a contract where if you give me all the imitation love I want and you give me all the imitation, there's an exchange of imitation love between the two parties. So when one party starts feeling less, they're getting a raw deal, they feel less imitation love, less conditional love, they start to complain. In other words, I'm not getting what I used to get before, so I'm angry. Whenever a person gets angry, that's a flag that they're practicing conditional love. I'd like to go to the next slide. And the reason for this slide is, this here is from Taproots. That's this book. Taproots, the underlying principles of Milton Erickson's therapy and hypnosis. So what's a taproot? Taproot is the root of a plant or a tree that drills down into the ground, right? Like a coffee tree has a taproot. And if that taproot gets caught by a rock, it grows back up, and the coffee never produces coffee. But if it goes straight through the ground where the water is, then it can survive. So the reason for this next reading is because when we practice conditional love, we do it unconsciously. So I want to show this one. That should be beliefs up there, by the way. Utilizing the patient's beliefs and frames of reference. There is a tale that illustrates this principle very well. It concerns a prince in ancient times who became convinced that he was a chicken. He shed all his clothes and refused to eat anything but corn off the ground. Much to the consternation of his father, the king brought great physicians and wise men from near and far to try to help his poor son, but alas, none succeeded in convincing the prince he was not a chicken, nor in getting him to give up his unusual behavior. Finally, a wise man came to the palace and offered to cure the prince. The king was skeptical, as he had already seen so many failures, but gave his permission for the man to try. The wise man asked that he be left alone with the prince. When they were alone, the wise man shed his clothes and joined the prince in eating corn off the floor. The prince looked at the wise man suspiciously and challenged him, asking who he was. The wise man answered that he too was a chicken. And went on eating his corn. He then asked the prince who he was, and he was a chicken. After a time, the prince accepted him as an equal. One day, the wise man got up and put on some clothing. The prince was shocked and protested that chickens do not wear clothes. The wise man merely replied he was a chicken, so obviously chickens do wear clothes. A while later, the wise man started to eat some human food that was brought to them every day. Again, the prince protested, and again the reply was given that he, the wise man, was a chicken and was eating that food, so obviously chickens can eat human food. In time, the wise man started walking upright and gave the same rationale for it when the prince protested. Gradually, the prince was led back to being a chicken who acted very much like a man, and the delusion passed. Do you like that story? I think it's funny. When you start receiving and giving unconditional love, the conditional love that you were trained with since you were like 1 day old until you got older can go away. But you have to find a wise man able to see you, not only see you for who you are, but able to go into your unconscious mind and change your belief system. So I want to give one more reading. This is from Father's book. His Father's book. Forgot my copy, but here it is. It's on page, A Peace-Loving Global Citizen, page 137, 138. Membership continues to grow. Whether I faced dozens of people or hundreds, I acted the same way, as if there were only one. I would listen whenever a person wanted to tell me about his or her personal situation. Whether it was an old woman or a young man, I would listen with dedication, as if this were the only person I had to deal with. Each member would say, "No one in Korea listens to what I have to say as well as Reverend Moon." A grandmother might start by telling me how she married and eventually tell me about her husband's illness. I enjoy listening to other people talk about themselves. When people open up to me and talk about themselves, I don't even realize the passage of time. I listen for them 10, even 20 hours. People who want to talk have a sense of urgency. They're looking for solutions to their problems. So I feel I need to listen to them with my full dedication. That is the way to love their life and repay the debt I owe for my life. The most important thing is to think of life as precious. In the same way that I listened with sincerity to what others had to say, I also shared with them my sincere heart with fervor, and I would pray for them in tears. Could you put that slide up again? Is Reverend Moon a wise man? according to the definition here. He's filled with love himself from God. He's able to see people, not only externally, we have a picture matching in the church, in the movement. Father can see very, very sharp. And I can tell you from my dealings with, I was always in the crowd. I never really had a one-on-one with Reverend Moon, but sometimes I would go into Belvedere and I'd say in my mind, "Hello, Father," and he would go like that. In other words, in my mind, I'd shout, "Hello," and he'd go like that. I did it a few other times. "Thank you, Father," and he'd go like. So I know he's sensitive internally. So he's aware of nonverbal. He can see nonverbal things, whether people move their eyes, their nose, or the way they move physically, nonverbally. But it's also can deal on a spiritual or unconscious level. So I know that because I tested him. And Father is unconditionally accepting. And he talks, and he had a reputation of no one in Korea listens to what I have to say as well as Reverend Moon. He's unconditionally accepting of the person and he listens with dedication. That word is a strong word. That word is like what the people I'm listening to is telling me what's sacred. He's treating their life as very precious. That's what a wise person does. A wise person has no consideration about himself when he's listening to another person. No judgment. No, you shoulda, you coulda, you woulda. No sermons. My kids are always saying, "I don't want to hear another sermon." Anyway, Reverend Moon is unconditionally accepting, and that's unconditional love. To talk about this point more, I want to talk about the Garden of Eden story just a little bit. When it was the time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as gifts to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best of the firstborn lambs. Okay, right away, what's the difference? Cain brought some of his crops. Abel brought the very best of his firstborn sheep. It doesn't say Cain brought the best of his crops, some of his crops. So the Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. Why not? Well, the answer is because Cain was coming to God from the perspective of conditional love, and Abel was coming to God from the perspective of unconditional love. That's why. Divine Principle says, Abel was the second born, therefore he was a little bit removed from the physical fall. But that's not the reason. The reason is Abel's offering was, I care about how God feels. So he gave the very best of his flock, whereas Cain didn't do that. Let's go on. This made Cain very angry. And he looked dejected, just like the wart king looked on the ground like that. Angry. When a person is angry, that's a manipulated behavior. That's a conditional love behavior. That's called getting and protecting behaviors. And you can study this book if you really want to learn about that. Why are you so angry? The Lord asked Cain. Have you ever heard people say, you make me so angry? That's a lie, because people don't make you angry. You choose to be angry yourself. in reaction to a situation you're in. See, we lie, we play the role of a victim, and we blame others without even being aware of it. Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what is right. What was God saying to Cain? If you practice unconditional love, you will be accepted. You'll be accepted. But watch out. Sin, so what's sin? Sin is crouching at the door. In other words, if you continue your conditional love behavior, watch out. Don't do that anymore. Then God says, but you must subdue and master it. In other words, you stop practicing conditional love, start telling your truth, be seen, tell me the truth, report to me. That's what they say in the church, right? Report to God. That's telling your truth. When you tell your truth, when you report to God your real truth, not with a bag over your head, your real truth, then God can accept you. And then you can go from there based on the faith you have and so what happened next? Did Cain master his conditional love? No, he didn't. This conditional love led to murder. One day Cain suggests to his brother, let's go out into the field. Why do they go out into the field? So no one would see them, because it's premeditated. He knows what he's going to do. In other words, Cain saying, I don't like the way you make me feel. Therefore, I'm going to kill you. And that's exactly what he did. So Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. So conditional love is practiced by the people who live on earth, according to St. Augustine's book. And it always leads to death, to murder. Whether you murder somebody in their heart or physically is almost the same thing, right? Right? So conditional love always leads to killing somebody else so that you can get what you want. And that's the way the world is. I remember when I was working in the MFT office, I used to get up at 2:30 in the morning and walk over from the New York Hotel at 9th Street, because that's where the Chevy van was parked. And I'd get the car and pull in front of the New Yorker Hotel, and the other staff would get in the car, and I'd drive them up to hear Father talk. So we would get there about 3:30 in the morning, maybe 4 o'clock. So usually 4 to 4:30 in there. And then we sit on the floor at 5 o'clock, and Reverend Moon was never late. I was there hundreds of times, never late, 5 a.m. every time, whether he's sick or whatever. It was a priority in his life, in other words. So 5 o'clock, he spoke until noon. So I sat on the floor for 7 hours. And then he broke for lunch, but then all the leaders started giving a report, and I didn't want to give up my spot. So it was really crowded. So I stayed there on the floor for the whole afternoon. And then around dinner time, Father came back. And he spoke another 5 or 6 hours. So I was in the same spot. And he didn't stop till 2:30 in the morning. So I was there on that floor, in that spot, for 23 hours. I couldn't feel my body anymore. It's like I was floating. But that was Father's purpose. Because he said here, and I'm still working on this one, I don't really know completely what he means by, when I'm talking to one person, I treat, even if he says, I would listen with dedication, whether there was one person to deal with or many. So Korean members very lucky because they had a one-on-one with Father a long time ago, but by the time he came to America in the 70s, I was just out there in the crowd. So I was on the floor for 23 hours floating, and that was really good because Father's an expert. You remember the video I showed last time? Yes. And I said, everything that Reverend Moon says is principled. So I'm getting a real big dose of what's principled. And so I'm trying to understand what the Master did to me for 23 hours with my I was there because I wanted to be there. So my voice will go with you. This is all about changing your unconscious self. In other words, we have, from the time we're little babies in the crib, our parents instill in us conditional love behavior programs, which have to be replaced. These conditional love behavior programs have to be replaced with unconditional love behavior programs. And that's what Father's doing. So when he makes you sit on the floor uncomfortably, what he's trying to get you to ignore what's out there. And that's what I tried to say in my talk last time, Living in the World of Cause. Ignore what's out there and focus on the inside. Internally, your unconscious mind. That's what he's trying to do. So I just want to conclude now. The first page of Divine Principle says, everyone, and who's he talking to? He's talking to the city, the citizens of the people who live in the city of Earth. That's who Divine Principle is talking to. Everyone that's a citizen of the city of Earth, without exception, is struggling to gain happiness. The first step in attaining this goal is to overcome unpresent unhappiness. Where does unhappiness come from? It comes from the practice of conditional love. So the first step to overcoming this present unhappiness is to get rid of practicing unconditional love by telling your truth. From small individual affairs to history-making global events, everything is expression of human lives, just like Father said. Every life is precious, which are constantly striving to become happier. How then can happiness be attained? You know the answer, right? By receiving and giving unconditional love. And that's the very first page of Divine Principle. It's almost the first page of the Bible, and everything else is how to do that in the whole Divine Principle. So that's the conclusion. I hope that my real hope is that the next generation, excuse me, I got a bad cold. The next generation can develop unification psychology on how to trance, T-R-A-N-C-E, form people from a lifetime of conditional love to a new life of living a life of unconditional love. That's my hope for young people out there to develop unification psychology, because it's really needed, especially as the church grows, the movement gets bigger. The idea that unconditional love will be everywhere should be part of this unification psychology that I hope develops. Not by me, anyway. Thank you very much for hearing this talk. I'd like to say a closing prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your patience in helping us and guiding us towards becoming loving children, children that are filled with unconditional love that comes from you and that is returned to you. Heavenly Father, Heavenly Parents, thank you for all your love, all your giving all this time when we don't know what it means to be living in the city of God. I pray that we can learn how to become unconditionally loving and giving people. I pray this prayer in the name of Donald B. and Nubco Archer, a Blessed Central family member.